Hello, viewers. Welcome to the History Valley podcast with your host, Jacob Bremen. On this episode, Professor James Tabor joins us to discuss the Jesus Dynasty and who he thinks is the father of the historical Jesus. His research on the Talpiot Tomb will also be discussed as well. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode on the History Valley YouTube channel with your host, Jacob Bremen. Today, I am joined by Professor James Daniel Tabor. So I will give a quick introduction here, and then we'll get on to the subject. Professor James Daniel Tabor received his Bachelors in Koine Greek at the Abilene Christian University and his Master's from the Pepperdine University. And he then went on to receive his PhD at the University of Chicago in 1981. He also served as the chair of the Department of Religious Studies at the University of North Carolina from 2004 to 2014. He has also worked with Shimon Gibson to excavate the John the Baptist cave at Suba. He also founded and directed the original Bible Project. He is the author of numerous articles and books, including The Jesus Dynasty, Paul and Jesus, How the Apostle Transformed Christianity, Paul's Ascent to Paradise, Restoring Abrahamic Faith, and much more. He is also well known for his work on the alleged Jesus Tomb, in which he also goes into great detail in his book, The Jesus Dynasty. He is also well known for his claim that the Roman soldier Pantera might have been the father of the historical Jesus, which will be a major topic of this episode. All right. That being said, my first question is, what led you to the conclusion that Tiberius Julius Abdes Pantera, the Roman soldier, might have been the father of the historical Jesus?
Okay, that's in some ways the whole topic. So,
Right.
Going right to the end. First of all, I've never asserted that this particular Roman soldier or any Roman soldier is the father of Jesus. What I did say in my book, The Jesus Dynasty, as I recall, is that if you were to fill out the birth certificate of Jesus, theoretically, they didn't have such things per se, but
Right.
you would put Mother Mary, Miriam, father unknown or unnamed or something. It happens quite often in our culture. Sometimes they might put the last name, and so where I would start on that, and you jump in and stop me for clarification, but I want to give you kind of a rundown of the whole thing real quickly as a summary.
Sure.
And that'll answer how I got to Tiberius Julius Pantera. The first thing I always ask is does Jesus have a human father? And, I teach in a university. It's a state university, but many of my students come from Christian backgrounds. And they would say, I think, because, I'm in North Carolina, the Bible Belt, a lot of them would say, well, he didn't have a human father. So obviously you're not going to find a human father because he didn't have one.
Right.
So I have to begin the work that I do, making clear to readers and hearers, listeners, in your case, that my assumption is that human beings have human fathers. So this becomes a more historical question. Assuming that Jesus had a human father and it wasn't missing half his DNA, or that God miraculously created DNA, and, in other words, not getting into theology or the incarnation, how did God become a man or anything of that sort.
Right.
Just that we have this historical figure, Jesus. We have his mother, Mary, that we know well, who's the father. And the earliest evidence for that is not the virgin birth stories that are only in Matthew and Luke. Those are later gospels. The earliest gospel is Mark. And the Gospel of Mark, maybe even written right before 70, the year 70, which is when Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans. Maybe some people even put a little before that. Mark does mention the paternity one time, Mark 6, verse 3, and he calls Jesus, Jesus, son of Mary. It says, is this not the carpenter, Jesus, son of Mary? And then are not his brothers here? And then the brothers are named James, Joseph, Simon, and Jude. And his sisters, who aren't named, but we think later Salome might be one. She's named at the burial and so forth. So that's where I began with our earliest record. And as you go through the Gospel of Mark, guess what? There is no Joseph. There's no Joseph.
Right.
He doesn't exist. Now, I would not conclude from that there wasn't a Joseph. I think there was a Joseph. But clearly Mark has no tradition about Joseph being the father or even a virgin birth story. Now, when Matthew rewrites Mark, which he does, Mark has 16 chapters, and it's all 98% of it is in Matthew, and then he adds all of his things too. But as he goes, he edits, and he says, is this not Jesus, son of Joseph? What an amazing edit. You know, his source said, is this not Jesus, son of Mary? And when you call a Jewish male the son of the mother, you're basically saying the father's unknown. There's a word in Hebrew that people misunderstand. It's mamzer, M-A-M-Z-E-R. And if you look it up, people say, well, that means bastard. It does not mean bastard. It means someone's whose birth is somehow irregular, or not just the normal mom, dad, had the kid, simple story. Something else happened. So I began there. That's our earliest source. And I would then go on a kind of sleuthing mission and say, if Joseph isn't the father of Jesus. Now here it's really interesting because my evangelical Christian students would also now agree with me. They go, yeah, Dr. Tabor, Joseph's not the father. Oh, interesting. And there was no father. So you see, in a funny way, I'm agreeing with the believing Christians and saying, nope, Joseph's not the father. But then I'm saying, so who would be the father?
Right.
Do we have a clue? Do we have a name? Do we have anything to go on? Okay. Now, when you read the virgin birth accounts, they're called virgin birth accounts. I'm going to mute my phone. I didn't think to do that. They're called virgin birth accounts. They're actually virgin conception accounts. That's more accurate. Matthew is really interesting, and he's the earliest after Mark, because what he says is Joseph was engaged to Mary. Now remember, in this time, a woman might get engaged at, say, 14. Some people say 12, but let's go with 14. And it doesn't mean they're dating and going out, to drive-in movies or something, if you know what I mean.
Right.
It means parents have arranged for the future, began to put together the legalities for this marriage to take place. It might not take place when they're 14. It might be 16 or whatever. We don't know how old the betrothed is, Joseph. But we're told he's a good man and he's a righteous man. And he finds out that his beloved spouse is pregnant. That's how Matthew presents it. Now, Matthew, of course, says she's pregnant by the Holy Spirit. But the phrase by the Holy Spirit does not necessarily mean in Greek the Holy Spirit impregnated her.
Interesting.
It means through the agency of the Holy Spirit. Now, I don't think Matthew thought that there was another man involved. So I'm not trying to say that. But I'm saying in our second earliest account, if you take them chronologically, first account, Mark, he's not even mentioned ever. And Jesus is called Son of Mary. Second account, Matthew, Joseph's like, oh, I'm engaged to this woman, but she's pregnant. That's not my baby. Okay. If you just stop there on the human, not the theological, we've got a unwed mother, not yet married. Now, before we condemn her, notice what Matthew does. He starts with the genealogy. You saw this in the book, the Jesus Dynasty. And he lists all of the men going from Abraham down to Joseph. So he's tracing Joseph's genealogy, and then he's going to tell you Joseph's not the father, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Because that would, like, why are you tracing his genealogy?
Exactly.
But did you notice that he mentions 3 women in the genealogy? And you never mention women in a Jewish genealogy. The women are understood to be the mothers of the next child, whoever it is. Abraham begot Isaac, Isaac
Right.
begot Jacob. You don't mention the women. And Jacob had 2 wives and 2 handmaidens, or sometimes called concubines, kind of surrogate wives. And you don't tell all the tribes of Jacob who the mothers were. You just don't do that. You say.
Right.
So think about that. He mentions 4 women. What do those 4 women have in common? They're all in the line of David, just like Jesus or Joseph. And they all have some sexual irregularity associated with them. First one, Rahab the harlot. Rahab the harlot? Yes, is listed. Ruth, the Moabite woman. Which Moabites are known for being very promiscuous and so on. I'm not saying she was, but in the story in the book of Ruth, she crawls up under the covers of Boaz, gets him drunk, and when he wakes up, he goes, "Oh, I guess we're together." Kind of, like, doesn't explain what happened. But it does say she uncovered his feet. And in Hebrew, feet is a euphemism for your sexual part of your body. So it's just so you say, well, that wasn't fornication. I mean, they were both eligible to marry. She was a widow, as I recall. And then it mentions Bathsheba, who's, the wife, and it even says the wife of Uriah, like, hey, David had Solomon, And so these women are mentioned. I'm trying to think who the other one is. Do you recall offhand? It was Rahab. There's one more in there. We could look it up, but it'll come to me in a minute. Anyway, I think what Matthew's signaling is I'm going to tell you a story about Mary becoming pregnant through the agency of the Holy Spirit. And Joseph was not the father. Before you freak out, realize that in this holy genealogy of David, we've got 4 other women that are directly descended from David that also might have been looked at by the culture as somehow tainted or immoral or unholy, and it all has to do with sex. Now, I'm not saying Matthew didn't believe in, quote, the virgin birth. The author of Matthew probably did believe that. But what I'm saying is if you strip it to the historical, it's kind of interesting to think about. He might be signaling, don't be too quick to judge Mary, because maybe God has purposes that are beyond your ken. Okay, that's about all we know. We have the brothers. I would assume they're children of Joseph because they do get married. Matthew is not at all a perpetual virgin guy. He says after Jesus' birth, Joseph did not sleep with Mary until she brought forth her firstborn son. That's at the end of chapter 1. So this is normal Jewish marriage,
Right.
That's not my child, but once that child is born, I will adopt that child, and then I will take my wife. And apparently there are at least 4 boys and 2 girls, and we even think maybe 3 girls because church tradition has traditions of another girl named Mary, and the Salome, we think, and we're not sure of necessarily the others, but let's say 2 for sure. Very possible. So that's where we kind of leave it. In the Jesus Dynasty, I offer some other possibilities that I'm not going to go into today. I'm not as convinced of them, but there's a chance that if Joseph died early and he had no children, that his brother Clopas would, and we do know his name of his brother was Clopas, he might have married Mary because that was required in Jewish law and raised children in the name of his brother. I suggest that again as a possibility, but that gets off into like the brothers, and we're talking about Jesus here, so I want to stay with that. So then I simply asked Jacob, is there a name out there?
Right.
Like we've built up the case, is there a name out there? And remember, I'm not suggesting I know anything about the circumstances.
Right.
You can imagine all kinds of things. I have a blog post called Why Believe the Slanderers? If a woman comes up pregnant in a little village like Nazareth, the slanderers are going to say, oh, she did this and she did that and she was supposed to marry Joseph. Okay, that seems to be what happened. But do we know the circumstances of her pregnancy? I mean, when Rachel is asked, will you go with Jacob? Her parents ask her, Isaac and Rebekah, do you want to go with this man? There is within Judaism the ability of a woman to say, no, that's not who I want to marry. Now, normally marriages are arranged, and it's even true in certain more patriarchal societies today, even not just Christian, Jewish, and Muslim, but India and other places, as you know, where marriages are arranged. It's just, the way things are.
Right.
So we shouldn't imagine, oh, Mary was fooling around or she's some immoral kind of person. What if there was a local Jewish person that she really considered to be her chosen one, her soulmate or whatever? And I'm just guessing, I have no idea. And what if the parents said, no, he has no prospects. You can't marry him. This is kind of like movie stuff. If I was doing a movie, I would have her say, well, we're already married in God's eyes. Something like that. What do you mean? What do you mean you're married in God's eyes? Well, we pledged did you know in Judaism, if you pledge yourself to a woman and she pledges herself to you, that is a marriage. You don't, even in America, I was told Abraham Lincoln, that'd be 1830s, he didn't have a marriage license. You didn't have marriage licenses. You wrote it in the front of the Bible. And the preacher that did it would sign and go, yeah, So
wow.
It's possible that Mary has something in her heart. Now, again, I could be accused in this interview of making a movie rather than an academic interview, but let me just say, I don't know. I have no idea. She doesn't come across to me as some sort of irresponsible person. And she's certainly highly favored and regarded by the Jesus movement and the followers. He's, as the mother of Jesus.
Right.
So I want to believe the best of her. So this blog post, I think it's called Why Not Believe the Best? And I just talk about that. I think I put some of that in the book. And then I asked, well, do we have a name? And that's where the Roman soldier thing comes in. But the way it comes in is kind of odd. It's in a 3rd century text. I've actually got it here. And it's important enough, I think, to read.
This is coming from, again, Celsus and Origin.
Yeah, Celsus and Origin, and we don't have Celsus. Celsus is a philosopher of the time. And here's what he writes. He's read Matthew and Luke, and he's a skeptic. He's not a Christian. He says, let us imagine what a Jew, let alone a philosopher, might put to Jesus. So he's saying, let's see what a philosopher might ask Jesus, or a Jew, not a Christian. Is it not true, good sir, that you fabricated the story of your birth from a virgin to quiet rumors about the true and unsavory circumstances of your origins? So here Celsus is being very slanderous. And he's in effect imagining somebody asking Jesus, why did you make up this crazy story? Is it not the case that far from being born in royal David's city of Bethlehem, you were born in a poor country town of a woman who earned her living by spinning? So he has this tradition that she's a cloth maker. The other tradition, she's a hairdresser.
Hmm.
Is it not the case that when her deceit was discovered, that she was pregnant by a Roman soldier named Pantera, she was driven away by her husband, the carpenter, and convicted of adultery? Indeed, is it not so that in her disgrace, wandering from home, she gave birth to a male child in silence and humiliation? Now, to me, that text is totally wrong, totally incorrect. It's a very skeptical, sarcastic, pagan writer saying, come on now, we know, we've heard the rumors about your mother. So there's no question that, and notice he says, imagine a Jew. He's trying to turn the Jews against the Christians. Like, the Jews are saying that his father was Pantera, and I think he was a Roman soldier. So for this to go for 100+ years on the rumor level, and it gets to him, shows that it's out there. People are saying, hey, I heard his name was Pantera. But the Roman soldier part is what Celsus added. You got to remember that.
Right.
And then people put it all together and they go, oh, if his father was Pantera, is that Roman soldier? And then they go to Germany and find the tombstone. Okay. I don't take that direction. What I would say is, does the name Pantera appear anywhere else earlier associated with Jesus? And it turns out that we have several rabbinic texts, and these are not the later Talmudic texts. Okay, this is important. These are texts that are in the Tosefta, which are, you've got the Mishnah, the Tosefta, the Talmuds. And they're set in Sepphoris. Now, Sepphoris is the big city, Herod's capital, Herod Antipas's capital, just north of Nazareth.
Right.
So it's interesting that they're even set in Sepphoris. A couple of the stories mention James. We think maybe the brother of Jesus. We're not sure. James of Shechin, he's called. And then they talk about Yeshua bar Pantera, Jesus, son of Pantera. And they're not talking about anything bad. Like, oh yeah, wasn't he, a mamzer or something like that. They're just saying, I heard that Yeshua ben Pantera once said this, and they're actually quoting him on some things he taught that we don't have in the Gospels. Very interesting quotes. I put them in my book. They're actually quoting him on some halakhic rulings. Halakhic rulings are when Jewish rabbis make judgments on points of law. And they're quoting Yeshua ben Pantera. They don't necessarily like the guy, but they're saying they kind of think it's wise. I'll give you one of them because it's sort of entertaining. The question is, if you're an observant Jew and you need to go to the toilet, but you're praying and you have all of your phylacteries on and your seat, and you've seen the Jews, you wrap your arm and wrap your head, and suddenly you got to go pee, let's say. You should have done it before. Now, do you need to take that stuff off and go pee and then go redo it all over again and start over? It's a discussion. And Jesus basically says something along the lines of that it's similar to Mark 7 about the latrine and eating unclean food. He basically says the kind of defilement that you would get if you did go and say you put your phylacteries up on a shelf and then you went to the bathroom, restroom, relieved yourself, and then came back. It's more like sort of like what goes to the toilet doesn't really matter. And there's several variations of this, because there's also a question of, if somebody got money from a harlot, would it be okay to use it and give it to God because it came from a bad source? And he says something similar there. So those are in the book. You can read them. My point is that they mention him in passing as Jesus, son of Pantera. And then there's an ossuary, a bone box in Jerusalem that was discovered north of Jerusalem, where somebody named Pantera, a Jew, is named, and he's the son of Simon, I think. I forget exactly. But the point is, it's a name in Jerusalem. It is known. And then a couple of the church fathers tell us that it's a name in the family of Joseph, and other sources say it's a name in the family of Mary. Now, these are Christians who believe in the virgin birth, and they've heard Jesus call Son of Pantera, and they're being asked. And they go like, yeah, that was a family name. I think the main idea is it came from Joseph's family, that there's maybe one of his brothers or ancestors or whatever was called Pantera. Not that it's Jesus' father, but they're just saying, what's the big deal that he's coming from a family that could generally be known as the Pantera family? That's actually their defense of it, which is a little odd, rather than getting all upset and saying, oh, that name's horrible, and no way could he have that name. So the name is out there. And then the question would be, well, then we can't probably go any further, because Jewish sources pretty early, long before Celsus or Celsus, know him by this name. Maybe that's some memory of who his biological father was.
So, I remember in the book you were saying that Panthera probably was a Jew, and that I guess from that, my question would be, under these circumstances, and I am aware Celsus is later and that earlier, and I was already familiar that with the fact that earlier Jewish sources did mention Panthera under a different context too. They didn't claim he was a Roman soldier. Did Celsus, or Celsus as some pronounce his name, did he confuse the terminology, the name Panthera, with one of the Roman soldiers that was probably called that, and that's how he conjured up that story? Is that possible?
No, I think probably by the time he's telling the story, it sounds like he's getting told that from his Jewish contacts that are against Jesus. And they're basically saying he's son of a guy named Pantera, and that guy was a Roman soldier. But that's not in our early sources.
Right. So that's a deliberate confusion.
That's a deliberate. What I would put it, the way I would put it together, and again, here we don't know. We just don't know. I don't even know if his father was named Pantera, but let's say it was.
Right.
You got to ask what happens in 4 BC. In 4 BC, I call it the year of the 3 messiahs. 3 different messianic figures arise: Judas the Galilean, Simon of Perea, and a guy who's named the Shepherd King, like David. And they all crop up after the death of Herod in March. So Herod dies in March of 4 BC, and there's a vacuum, and Augustus, the emperor, is going to decide how to divide it up, because he was over the whole land, and Herod had several wills, and it was very complicated, and Herod has a number of sons, and they're all rivals, and each of them wants certain territory and so forth.
Right.
So during that vacuum period of the summer, Josephus, the Jewish historian, recounts this in great detail. You can read it in Jewish War. He says that huge crowds came together at Pentecost in the summer, and there were riots and all kinds of things, and they were saying, we want a native king, and there were these Messianic guys that came up. So what the Romans did is they sent down the legions from Syria. Some sources say 3 legions, some say 4, which is 6,000 men plus auxiliary troops. So maybe 10,000, 30, 40,000 troops coming from Syria, imagine. And they come down to the Galilee. They burn Sepphoris. They destroy Sepphoris. It's not the capital of Herod, hasn't come yet, Herod Antipas, because that's where Judas had centered his revolt. That's 4 miles from Nazareth. So again, this is almost Tabor's movie, but let's say there's a young boy of Mary's wider family named Pantera. Let's make him 17, 18 years old. And he was with Mary, and he's the father of this child, this unborn child, or the born child. But the parents have refused and gone ahead with the arranged marriage. And what if he got caught up in the revolt and impressed into the Roman army? So, see, he wouldn't be a soldier at the time, but he could become a soldier later. And that's why I didn't discount. There's a tombstone in Germany, pretty near Frankfurt. It's the tombstone's in a museum now.
Right.
That in the Römer Halle Museum, but the actual place is on the Rhine River, just north where it empties into another river. And it was a Roman camp at the time. And this tombstone was discovered in 1859, as I recall. This is all in my book in great detail, but I don't always have it on the top of my head.
Yeah, I saw a picture of you measuring the
Yeah.
tombstone.
And so I decided to go there and check it out, people. And what it does say, his name is Tiberius Julius Abdes Pantera.
Mm-hmm.
He's of Sidon. So that got me enough interested. Sidon is just north of Galilee. It's only 30 or 40 miles away from Nazareth. And Jerusalem's like 90 to 100 miles away. And Jesus is recorded to go up to Sidon and preach and so forth. So the point is it's accessible. And Sidon's mentioned quite a bit in the New Testament, 4 or 5 times. So when he dies, he's 62. He served for 40 years, and he's an archer of the first cohort.
Mm-hmm.
And I speculated he's contemporary with Mary. The chronology works out.
Mm-hmm.
He's from that same area. Is it possible that this kid got abducted into the Roman army or joined the Roman army? Jews did join the Roman army. Right. And they were actually given privileges that they didn't have to swear allegiance to the gods and so forth. They were given certain. And sometimes people were just forced into the Roman army, but either way, I think it's possible. Or maybe he was not of the tribe of Judah. Maybe he was of what they call the Samaritan tribes, which would be the lost tribes of the north. You know, some of which lived in the Galilee, perhaps, because he's also called a Samaritan a couple of times. Now, when we hear Samaritan, we think of the Good Samaritan and all that, but
right.
What you're really saying, are you that renegade, bastardized group that the Assyrians brought in after they took away, the tribes? But the Samaritans say, no, we are what's left of the lost tribes. The Samaritans have a Torah. They have their own Torah, the Samaritan Pentateuch. So when you call Jesus a Samaritan, and in the Gospel of John, they say, his Jewish enemies say, we weren't born of fornication, you Samaritan. Are you basically saying your father was not of the tribe of Judah, or maybe something like that? So there I just have to leave it. I mean, I don't know if this... I've done more careful work since the Jesus Dynasty. I'm just now finishing a book on Mary, the mother of Jesus, and I have a lot more detail on it. It won't be out for a while because books are all held up by most publishers. They got inundated with the election and with President Trump and all kinds of books. If you notice on television, every book is politics, like elections and voters and what happened January 6th and all this kind of stuff. And so probably won't come out until 2023. Books typically take a year, but it's already out in French. I went ahead and released it in French. So if anybody reads French, they can go ahead and read it. But anyway, I put a lot more detail in it. And I do mention, and this is in the Jesus Dynasty, there is this odd thing where Jesus goes to Sidon once. He goes to Sidon, the town. And it says he enters a house and would have no one know it. And then it just says, and he came out of the house. Now, everybody said, so you're saying he visited his dad or his dad's family or what? I said, I'm not saying anything. I'm saying that Isn't it odd? You're reading along, and it says, and Jesus went to Sidon and entered a house, and he came out of the house. Nothing else.
Hmm.
I don't know. But at least it shows he went there and maybe knew somebody there. So I don't think we can solve it. But if he did enlist at age 22 as a provincial or foreigner, he would have got his citizenship after 25 years. That's how he would get the name Tiberius Julius after the Emperor Tiberius.
Right.
Then he could re-enlist for 25 more years, which was cut short by his death at age 62, which gives him 40 years of military service. And he was born squarely in the lifetime of Mary, as she would have been around the age of marriage. He's a little bit older than her, in other words. So I don't know. I don't think we can know more than that. And then you get into theology. And Christian believers, conservative believers would say, well, Jesus didn't have a father, so this whole thing is not worth discussing.
Right.
In fact, it would be offensive to some people to suggest Jesus had a human father. Most of my scholarly colleagues that are more academic in their approach, they would say, well, Joseph's obviously the father. And these virgin birth stories were made up later to give Jesus kind of divine status.
Right.
I'm open to that, but I do think it's odd that this Pantera thing is circulating and that it could be connected to the Joseph and Mary family as some name associated with the family.
And it's also odd that Mark never mentions Joseph.
That Mark never mentions Joseph. And in fact, let me think. I don't think the Gospel of John mentions Joseph by name. How about that? I'm pretty sure he says only... Wait, no, he does say Jesus is son of Joseph, but when he has... I'm trying to think if he has any stories of Joseph. Yeah, he does call Jesus son of Joseph, but that would be his legal name if he was adopted.
Right.
See, in Matthew, it's not. What we're told by Matthew is Joseph didn't reveal that the child wasn't his. It says he could have put her away publicly and shamed her, and would have just ruined her life. But he didn't, as if he might have just kept it quiet and said to her, look, I want to marry you. That is my child. It's your child. It's my child. It's our child. I'm giving that child my name. It's very possible. I'm trying to think. It's either Luke or John that they always say the father, but they don't say the name Joseph. Yeah, I think it's in John. Yeah, he says something like, this is Jesus, son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know. That's like, why would you say it like that? Jesus, right. Son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know.
Mm-hmm.
Why are you... That's in John. I think it's a little strange, the language.
Yeah.
There's also a passage in the Gospel of Thomas that says, he who knows his father and mother will be called the son of a harlot. Jesus said that. It's a saying of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And what if he was saying, I know my father and mother, and you guys still call my mother a harlot? It's possible. So I know some of your listeners or viewers are going to think, boy, that's a bunch of speculation. Yeah, it is. But I'm trying to be clear where I'm speculating and where I'm not. I think Jesus had a human father. The only name of a human father, if Joseph's not the father, is Pantera. And I think it's possible that Celsus is reflecting something that is passing among Jewish gossip, gets all distorted into something evil.
Right.
But if I were writing a novel or doing a film, which maybe I'll do someday, I would present it as a wonderful love story that would inspire people. I know for somebody to be like, "Oh, God, how could you even say that?" But people can fall badly, madly in love with a really good person, and it might not work out for all kinds of reasons.
Right.
Happens all the time.
Yeah.
And what if Mary said to Jesus, now here I'm really speculating. What if she said, "You don't listen to them when he's a kid. Your father was the best man on the planet, and don't you ever forget it. I love your father. There's no one better. Unfortunately, he was taken from us." He could also be killed. He could have been killed in 4 BC. Then this Roman guy wouldn't be his father. The only reason I bring the Roman guy in is he's called Abdes. His name is Abdes. I don't know if you know Hebrew. Abed.
It sounds familiar.
It means servant of the Lord.
Mm.
It's a Semitic name. Now you could say, well, it's the Lord Serapis or the Lord, some other Lord, but it's odd that you would have that as your name. It's a Semitic name. He's from, he's from the region Sidon. He has a Semitic name. He fits the chronology, and he ends up being a Roman soldier. So, but once I put this out, of course, that's all people want to talk about, and they would all say to me, very first question on television and other interviews when the book came out, because the book was really, it was a bestseller. I was on 2020 Nightline. Let's see, Good Morning America. It's the cover of a couple of magazines, and the headline always was, "Tabor says Jesus' father was a Roman soldier," and then I'd have to patiently explain, "No, I actually don't say that. I do think he had a human father. I don't think we have a name for sure, but the name we do have is Pantera, not Joseph." So that's pretty much it. Kind of give you a basic idea of, if you want to ask me a few more details.
I want to go back to the 4 women you were bringing up in the genealogy in Matthew earlier.
Yeah, let me look those up.
I think their names are Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and Bathsheba.
Tamar, yes, I left out Tamar. Yes, of course. Yeah, because oh boy, she's really something. She's the one who was Jacob, the patriarch Jacob, had. She was married and her husband died, and I think she was married a second time and he died, as I recall. It's in Genesis 38. You can look it up. And then Jacob said, "Well, I have another son, but he's not old enough to marry. But when he's old enough, he will be your husband." So she waits and waits, and finally he's way past old enough, and Jacob's not fulfilling his promise. So she comes up with this scheme to go down to this place where Jacob frequents, a red light district, we call it. It's a corner of crossroads back in those days, where the women would be, the prostitutes. She dresses like a prostitute, makes sure she stops Jacob, seduces him, sleeps with him, gets pregnant on purpose. He didn't bring his wallet with him, and he goes, "I don't have anything to pay you with." He goes, "Well, you can send me the money, but leave me your staff and your ring as a pledge. And as soon as the servant brings the money, I'll give them back." So he believed her. And then when her pregnancy, then he just, I think, he did send the money and she was gone. So they go, "Where's that woman that was," I don't know any woman like that, because she wasn't a regular. And so it's quite a story. And then he hears that one of the women in your family, kind of like a widow woman that used to be married to one of your kids, she's pregnant. And he goes, "What? How did she get pregnant?" And she's going to be burnt with fire right now. She's going to be punished as an adulteress. and bring her here. And she walks in with the staff and the ring, and she goes, well, I need to tell you that the father of the child owns these two things. And he's like, oh, no. So he admits, well, that child is born. It's twins. Twins are born. And one of them becomes the lineage of King David, the royal lineage. And Joseph is from that lineage. And so that's the fourth woman, yeah. So you got Rahab the harlot, Tamar the prostitute, you got Bathsheba the adulteress, and who's the other one? Now I'm forgetting. Ruth, the Moabite woman.
Yeah, there we go.
So I think Matthew's just saying, don't be so quick to judge and say, well, isn't there some bad stories about that one or this one or that one? Because, yeah, there are some bad stories, but they were chosen by God and used to bring about the royal line of David. See, all of them are leading up to the line of David, and then even Solomon is the son of Bathsheba. So, I mean, there's no possibility that Matthew put those in except for that reason, because you never put the women in. So he's winking to the reader, and he's saying, just don't make a hasty conclusion that Mary was an evil person. So there you go. Bizarre stories. Now, Luke's genealogy, it's in chapter 3. And I know almost all my scholarly colleagues say this is just a cheap attempt at harmonization by the fundamentalists, because you got two different genealogies, and they go, one is Mary and one is Joseph.
Right.
You know, that way we won't have a problem.
Right.
I actually think that is correct. I think the other one is Mary. And I think Luke signals that by the way he says he has a different father for Joseph. Matthew has Jacob, and then there would be a Joseph. And Luke has Eli, which is the father of Mary, Eli or Eliakim. And that's the name of the father of Mary. So in our tradition that we have the Evangelium of James and so forth. So I think it is Mary's genealogy. And there's a lot of that in my new book on Mary. And I think Jesus got his Messianic pedigree from his mother, which today people would say, impossible. Women can't pass on the royal seed. And yet you start reading your Bible a little bit and you find out references to the princesses of the royal family who carry the royal seed. And this is just an anachronistic attempt to read back into the ancient world some rules that people have today, like it's got to be a male, got to be this, got to be that. I think he got his Davidic pedigree from his mother. That's my view. So no, that's not. I think I put that in the Jesus Dynasty. I can't remember. Maybe I do. Maybe I don't. Now, you do know the other thing in Matthew's genealogy that's really interesting. If you do think that's Joseph's genealogy, which it is, and that he's the father of Jesus, which scholars all say, yeah, you know, if you've interviewed Bart Ehrman or anybody, they'll go, yeah, Joseph's most likely the father, because he's the only one around, you know, it's got to be Joseph. But it's interesting that in Matthew's genealogy, not only does he mention these four women, but when he gets down to the end to Joseph, he makes it clear that he's not the father, and he also traces him through a king of Israel. His name is Jeconiah. He's on down from David, just before the exile. He's right before Zedekiah. Well, actually, I think he's the son of Zedekiah, but he's in Zedekiah's time. And because he was so wicked, God says, no one of this man's seed will ever sit on the throne of David and rule again. And that's become a huge problem for people, because for Christian believers, they go, well, There you go. Joseph's not the father. Thank God. Otherwise, Jesus would be cursed. Of course, the scholars who think Joseph's the father, they wouldn't particularly care about that verse, like somebody's idea of a curse during the first exile.
Right.
But that is a problem in the text when you're tracing a line that is actually cursed, and nobody of that line is supposed to ever sit on the throne of David and rule. And that's in Ezekiel and Jeremiah, two places. And what Ezekiel says is, I will overturn the throne and give it to him whose right it is when he comes. Like maybe somebody you're not expecting, like son of a woman. I mean,
Wow.
possibly. So that's those are some of the things I work on. The reason I called the book The Jesus Dynasty, and I hope your listeners, viewers will give it a read, is because when Jesus dies, his brother takes over, James.
Mm-hmm.
And when he dies, Simon takes over, who's either a brother or a cousin. But like the dispute with the Prophet Muhammad when he died, you have the Shia that say it has to be a blood descendant of Ali, who is married to Muhammad's daughter, and the Sunni that say no, it's whoever is chosen by the imams.
Mm.
And you had a similar thing in Christianity. There's a group that says no, the leader of the movement needs to be of the royal family of Jesus or Mary, basically Mary. She's the Queen Mother. And that would make James and Simon and Jude and Joseph all candidates, and then their children. We have references to their children. They call them the desposunai in Greek. It means the family of the Lord. They're well known. I'm not talking about Jesus having children. He may have. But I'm talking about the wider family. Let's call it the family of Mary, the royal family of Mary, if she is of royal family. And I think she has priestly blood as well. That's why you get all those, 6 times used words like Levi, Matthew, Matat in her genealogy. So she's actually carrying priestly as well as Davidic lineage from her background. And it is a dynasty, I think, but obviously they're expecting the end of the age to come in their lifetime, and they're not trying to set it up to go for the next 2,000 years, which monarchies then always have a problem with, because you can have a childless king or queen, and then you have to marry into other families. Like, as you know, the royal family of Britain, if you start tracing it, is unbelievably complex as to who went in to make that family. It's
Right.
literally not father, son, father, son, father, son. It's not even close to that. And then women come in, and like Queen Elizabeth and what family she came from. So royalty becomes something, in Europe at least, that it's more like acknowledged as royal. So if people say, well, do you think James is the Messiah then? I certainly wouldn't say he's the Messiah, but I would say he's a Messiah, meaning he was chosen or anointed to succeed Jesus in leadership. And I show that in the book very strongly. Now, more and more people today have heard of James, but when I wrote the book in 2006, it's been out since 2006, a lot of people go, James who? Yeah, but there was a little talk about the James Ossuary that was found, and there were other
I remember
references
that.
to
You talked a
James that
lot
got
about
out
it.
in the press. Yeah, so more people now know James. Eisenman has written about James. He's out there quite a bit.
I interviewed him
Several
twice.
several
Yeah.
books about James. Jeffrey Butts has a wonderful book on James. I would really recommend you talk to him sometime. Uh,
I'll
his
keep that
book
in
came out
mind.
in 2006 as well, I believe. We didn't even know. It's like two people writing the same thing, and we didn't even know. It often happens. But anyway, I think that's important. So in the book, I'm trying to show that aspect of the Messianic movement. And so the book, you've read it, you can tell me, but
Mm-hmm.
I think it's kind of a page turner as much as a book like that can be. People tell me that they can't put it down. So I hope that's true. Yeah.
Is it? Yeah, I found it. I found it to be very, very interesting. I like what's said in there. Uh, I like it. Uh, I had a good experience with it.
Yeah, well, I try in all the controversial areas to, let people have their own views
Right
and then offer what I can. So
now,
I have no problem at all if somebody says, "Well, I don't think Jesus had a human father," then that's a faith statement that then obviously you wouldn't be going historically looking because no
right,
such person existed. I personally cannot hold that view
right.
because I just don't think it's a historical kind of thing. So
I agree. That gets me to the next question here. If I remember correctly, you believe that the James Ossuary is authentic.
I
Um,
do. Yeah, I
could
do.
you explain to listeners what led you to that conclusion?
Yeah, well, I'm going to mention my blog here. It's jamestabor.com because if your viewers can go to that website, my name.com,
I'll have the link in the description
and
as well.
type in James Brother Jesus, you'll get probably 2 dozen posts on that in great detail. So I'm going to give you the quick overview.
Okay.
Um, and I I followed it and studied it very closely. I know the owner of the ossuary, Oded Galan.
Mm.
Um, have spent a lot of time with him, talking to him. And I think he tells a credible story. The only part of his story that is a little bit fuzzy is the exact time that he acquired it.
Ah.
And it is true that he gave different times at different interviews.
Huh.
And he says it was just maybe a lapse of memory. But you have to remember about Oded. He's probably, other than Musayev, who's now dead, Oded would be maybe the greatest collector of antiquities in the state of Israel.
Wow.
In other words, that's what he does. And he didn't, when he got the ossuary sometime in the 70s from a dealer, he said that he didn't recognize it. He said, I didn't even know Jesus had a brother. So I saw Yeshua. Oh, that's interesting. But Jesus is a common enough name. I think 5% of males had the name Yeshua. We have 19 other ossuaries with the word Yeshua on them. Some of those, I think, refer to Jesus of Nazareth, but
Hmm.
like reverencing him somehow. But that's covered in the book also, I think. But anyway, I can tell you this. He has never sold any of his antiquities. If he buys something, he keeps it. So this is not somebody that you say he's an antiquities dealer. No, he's an antiquities collector, and he loves his stuff. And I do not believe he, had it forged or anything like that. Even though at the trial you had paleographers and others, even Chris Ralston testified and said that he thought it was a forgery, especially the last part,
Hmm.
uh, Brother of Jesus. But there was also testimony about original patina being in the
Hmm.
letters for Yeshua. I'm not an expert on those fields. I'm not even a paleographer, but um, just putting everything together, I pretty well stay with the case Herschel Shanks presented in the magazine, Biblical Archaeology Review, and the arguments he gave. And Oded was not convicted of forgery. Doesn't mean the ossuary is authentic, but it means there was no evidence to convict him of forgery.
Right.
And he was acquitted on all of those counts. So I just think if there had been strong enough evidence, he would have got convicted of forgery. You'll hear all kinds of rumors about it.
Right.
But the problem with it, it became a controversial topic because people began to talk about Jesus having a brother. And then you get into this whole thing that I'm talking about. And so there was one side of the world, I'm talking about theologically.
Mm-hmm.
It was funny. It got hit from all sides. Start with Catholics. Well, Jesus didn't have a brother, James. He had a cousin. So it can't be authentic for that reason. And then you go to, let's say, academics would say, well, it's unprovenance and it's too good to be true. What are the chances you would find that? And we don't know where it came from. Now, if you look at my blog and you see all those posts, you'll see that just recently, in the last 2 years, there have been new tests that show that that ossuary came from the Talpiot Jesus family tomb, most likely. And it has to do with soil, not patina. Patina was mentioned in my book, The Jesus Dynasty, right at the end, especially the paperback. If you get the paperback, it's more up to date than the hardback. I think the hardback you can't get now except used.
I think I have the. Yeah, I think I have the paperback. Yeah.
Yeah, it has that appendix on the update on the ossuary. And so this is soil tests, and it was done by the Israel Antiquities, collected the soil. So Aryeh Shimron headed the team that did it. And it has to do with soil in every environment all over Jerusalem. They took a huge sample of tombs, I think 30 tombs or so, blind test. And it has to do with, even if it's in, like on the Mount of Olives, you have a tomb on the north and a tomb on the south, the soil will be different. It has to do with weather, erosion, exposure, all kinds of things. And what you do is you check all the elements that are in the soil and the percentages, and you set up graphs. And when you put the James ossuary against the Talpiot Tomb soil, it's like it fits very, very closely. This percentage of iron, this percentage of phosphorus, which means it's been exposed to the same geological conditions. And it was pretty brilliant because limestone soaks soil up. It's a soft stone. So the bottom of an ossuary has the soil embedded in it. And that's what they scraped off. And they checked the soil. And the paper's online. If you go to my blog, you can find it. You could even post the paper if you wanted, the actual scientific paper. It's an amazing paper. It's published in an academic journal. And a lot of it is all of these color charts and graphs showing this tomb and, you know, associating all the elements in various ways. So if you add that to the tomb, Jesus, son of Joseph, and you have Mary and Mariamne and Yosef, and then you have James, son of Joseph, that increases the percentage dramatically in terms of it maybe being associated with Jesus of Nazareth.
Wow. That's amazing.
I don't think it necessarily shows Jesus of Nazareth is in the tomb. That would be maybe your first guess, but I suppose you could hold the view that someone named their child Jesus to honor the other Jesus, and that could be the Jesus who's the son of Joseph, Jesus' brother Joseph. You know, you could argue something like that. But to me, it's kind of like Occam's razor. You go for the simple explanation. You got a James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus, Jesus, son of Joseph. And those two are probably brothers, father named Joseph. And who do we know in the New Testament? You know, Joseph with two people attributed to him with those names. Yosef is a nickname of the brother in the Mark. It's translated Yosis, but it's Yosef. It's not Yosi. There's a difference with a hey on the end. It's a pretty rare name. I have another book I wrote after the Jesus Dynasty. I don't know if you know it. It's called The Jesus Discovery. And it updates everything in this on these subjects. James Ossuary, Talpiot Tomb, everything. And it's extremely thorough and very documented with hundreds and hundreds of notes and original sources. And so I find that a lot of people they hear things, but they really don't know too many of the facts. But probably my blog has the most on the Talpiot Tomb. And a lot of times people say, well, James Tabor is the only academic scholar who gives any weight to this. That's not actually exactly the case, but I'm one of a few. But that has never bothered me because I'm going to judge something by the evidence.
Right.
And I would tend to say, well, what I've found is when people say that, if I start asking them even the most basic questions, they're not that familiar with the subject. They're just raising a criticism.
Right.
You know, it's not like, oh, yeah, I spent weeks and weeks reading every possible thing. And yes, I've read your book from cover to cover. And I have decided that it has no weight. That isn't what they're saying. They're saying, well, why were you, if it's true, why are you the only one that agrees with it? It's like, I don't know. You'd have to ask them. Or else you'd have to study it yourself and become competent in the area that we're talking about.
Right.
I find there's an article that appeared in, I think it was Newsweek. It's on my blog. And it's like the top 10 reasons that this can't be the Jesus tomb. And it's written by two of my friends. I know them both. They're colleagues. I like them both. And I wrote a response and said, this is really good to have this out there. Only problem is all 10 are mistaken. What you're stating is not actually factual. 10 points. Let me go through them. And I just went through and I showed, actually, that's not the case. Here are the facts, and I give the documentation. Nobody ever responded to that. They're just like quiet. So it just becomes kind of like, you know, you all read on the internet, oh, Tabor's a crackpot scholar. He's a fringer. He's this, he's that. I don't really care about any of that name calling.
Right.
But I'd be glad to discuss the subject with anybody who wants to talk. The subject.
Right.
And I think you'll find that whether you're doing the statistics, the soil tests, the what's called the prosopography, like you'll hear, these are really frequent names. They're the most frequent names in Judaism of the time. Partly true, but mostly false. You begin doing the stats on how frequent.
Right.
If you picture 50,000 people in a stadium and you ask who has a mother named Mary, probably up to half might, and you say the rest of you sit down, they'll be standing. Not even half, but up to half.
Right.
And then you say, okay, father named Joseph, sit down if your father's not Joseph. Well, at that point, Joseph is a common name, but you know, you're dealing with math here.
Mm-hmm.
It's all in my book. I figured out the stats. I had somebody do it for me. You can tell how many would sit down, and it's quite a few sit down, but there's still some left. And you say, who had a brother named James? Well, James is a really rare name. That's your name. Jacob is James. You probably. It's that you wouldn't think it's rare. And I'm not sure why it's rare. Maybe because he's the father of Israel, so you just don't use that name. But it's extremely rare, James. Like less than 1%. All of a sudden, almost everybody sits because they don't have a brother named James. And then you got these two women. Yeah, I had a son named Jesus, and I had a brother named James. What? Do you have any more kids? Yeah, I had one named Yosei. Ooh, Yosei. What was your third one? Oh, his name was what? I don't know. Eleazar. Oh, okay. Well, you sit down. I mean, I'm being silly here, but the point is, what I usually tell people we've identified probably 1,200 tombs in Jerusalem from the period. 3,000 ossuaries. Not all of them are inscribed. But of the ones inscribed, there's not another tomb with, say, 8-10 people in it that you could even argue is the Jesus tomb, because you'll have maybe one name Jesus, and then none of the other names will fit. You see what I'm saying?
Right. But that's not the case with the Talpiot Tomb.
The Talpiot is the only one that could fit. Doesn't mean it fits, but it could fit. Whereas it's not like, so when you say, well, the names are common, but as a cluster, it's not a common cluster, because there's no other cluster like it in all of Jerusalem as far as we know. Now, you say, well, maybe we'll find one tomorrow. Maybe we will, but I'm starting to doubt it, because Jerusalem has been built all the way around now. And occasionally a tomb is found, but it's pretty rare that tombs are found now. Just about all of them have been found. So, from building projects and so forth.
Right.
So, it is what it is. It doesn't matter to me particularly. I don't think everybody's under, the reason they don't like this is this idea of resurrection. And for that, you got to read my other book, my third book, Jesus and Paul. Or even in the Jesus Discovery, I cover this a little bit. I believe the earliest Christian view of resurrection was transformation into a spiritual body. And you could leave the old body behind like a residue. And that is from Paul, where he talks about the old body's like old clothing. You take off your old clothing, you're naked, but he said that's not what you want. That's the state of being dead or sleeping. And then you wake up, your soul or your inner self, and you reclothe yourself with the spiritual body. And he says there's a physical body and a spiritual body. Paul's real clear on that. 1 Corinthians 15, 2 Corinthians 5. And so he says this old clothing, it's just discarded. I mean, it goes back to the dust anyway. You don't need to have resurrection. You don't need to find the body of anything. Resurrection has nothing to do with the body. But so in Mark, there are no appearances of Jesus, as you know, Mark 16:8. And he says, you'll see me in Galilee, as I said. So I think they went up to Galilee and they saw like a vision of Jesus, just like Paul. Paul likens his vision of Jesus to the apostles. He said, he appeared to them and then he appeared to me. But everyone has Luke in their head and John with those physical appearances where like, touch me, it's my body, and so forth. I think those are later. As time went on, you had the Celsuses of the world making fun of resurrection. You know what they said? How do you know you didn't see a ghost? How do you know you didn't imagine it? Oh, well, he came in and ate a meal with us. Oh, okay. And you touched him, right? Yeah, we touched him. I saw him bite a piece of bread. I bit the same piece of bread. I touched his wounds. I don't think those are historical accounts. I think Paul's the earliest. I go by the earliest account is what I'm going to give the most credit to. Then the next is Mark. Then the next is Matthew. And guess what? Matthew has an appearance in Galilee, not in Jerusalem. And they're on a mountain and they see Jesus. That sounds kind of like a vision. And it says, but some doubted. That's in Matthew 28. They're on a mountain. And I'm picturing it's like the transfiguration. They're having a visionary experience. Now, some people say, well, so you're saying it didn't really happen. I'm not saying it didn't really happen. Who am I to judge apparitions and things people claim to see? If you're very skeptical, you're going to say, it's all just the mind creates it.
Right.
But I don't know enough about the universe to be able to say that. The universe has mysteries to it. We all have mysteries in our lives.
Right.
Where somebody dies, maybe you sense a presence, a light. I mean, many, many stories. Who's to say all those are just complete, delusion or fantasy? That's not my job. But what I would say is finding the bones of Jesus in an ossuary have nothing to do with resurrection, any more than the ashes scattered at sea that many people do. They scatter ashes at sea and say, well, that person can't get resurrected now because you just threw their body away. How are we going to get it back? It's ridiculous. So I don't think that was the early Christian view of resurrection. Was transformation from a flesh and blood physical state, dead or alive, to a eternal spiritual state, an immortal spiritual state that would be glorious and so forth. And that's what is claimed about Jesus, that he was raised in glory, that he had this glorious body. Now, you know, that body is pictured one time in the New Testament. It's actually described. So we don't have to guess what it is. It's in Revelation, I think it's chapter 1, where Jesus appears to John. And it's actually described. It says it's like looking at the sun in its strength at midday. That's exactly what Paul said. It says it was about noon, and I looked up and I saw a light brighter than the sun. People say, well, that doesn't prove resurrection. We need like a body walking around. And you think, well, how would a body walking around, that would prove resuscitation. That body would still be physical if it's got wounds and eats bread. And
Right.
so that's not really resurrection. That's resuscitation.
Yeah.
I don't know how long it's. Do you happen to know the longest period from brain death to resuscitation? I think it's getting pretty long. Definitely like way over 5-10 minutes.
I think it's.
They brought people back.
I'm not positive about this. I could be wrong. I think I heard something about even 30 minutes. I'm not certain though.
Because the cells don't start dying a second after the blood stops.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
They'll die pretty soon because they need the oxygen. So, you know, I don't think finding the tomb of Jesus has anything to do with faith and resurrection. That would be based on other criteria that people would have to decide about.
Right.
Whether you give credibility to these kinds of visionary experiences or not. So that kind of gives you a pretty good view of a lot of the things I do. It's funny, these things that are the most controversial are not really the things I'm most interested in. You know, I mean, I cover them because it's archaeology and it's history and it's out there. And I didn't discover these tombs. You know, I didn't discover the James Ossuary.
Right.
So I write about it. I didn't discover the Pantera statue. That was found in 1859 by a building crew putting in a new railroad station in Germany. So what I'm more interested in is be similar to Dom Crossan and others, the message of Jesus. Like, what is it that he taught that would make him different from other messiahs of the period? Because we got a half dozen messiahs, actually more than probably a dozen or so, during about 100-year period. They're all killed, by the way. Every one of them was killed. So he's one of the ones killed, and several are killed by crucifixion. So what makes him different? What makes him endure? And part of the reason is theology, because they created all these things about virgin birth, resurrection, in heaven. But why would it be compelling to me? Like, I don't study legends about Isis or legends about Serapis, or, I mean, I could have done that in grad school. I was raised a Christian. I've devoted 40 years of my life to studying the historical Jesus. Why? I could have picked Hillel, or I could have picked Gamaliel, or I could have picked somebody else, even though we don't have as much material. If I just want to be an ancient historian, I could find better, I could find better sources to do somebody else. because like Cicero, we have letters he actually wrote. Study Cicero for 40 years, become the Cicero expert. But for me, it's because of his compelling message. So, and it has to do with what people generally call the Sermon on the Mount, but it's the Q material. It's very apocalyptic, and therefore it's got to be taken very critically, because what was expected did not happen. But ironically, Jesus doesn't tie the kingdom of God just to an intervention from heaven, as people expected. Several times he ties it to someone understanding what religion's all about. Like he tells one guy once, who realizes that the temple, the sacrifices don't mean anything to God compared to loving God and loving your neighbor. This is Mark 12. And Jesus says, you're not far from the kingdom of God. Now, nobody ever said that except Jesus. He's now using kingdom of God to mean you're not far from what the whole purpose of creation is all about, which is to bring the will of God to earth as it is in heaven. The Lord's Prayer, let your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So that to me resonates powerfully, and it doesn't have to be from Jesus, but certainly everybody on the planet recognizes you got the Buddha and you got Jesus. And frankly, that's about it. As far as teachers who, I don't know, I study all the religions, and you can go to Lao Tzu and the I Ching, and you can go to the Bhagavad Gita, and you can go to the Tao and Confucius and find maxims and wisdom. But in terms of that Western biblical tradition, Jesus echoes a lot what Hosea, Amos, Joel, the prophets said, and it all has to do with like justice and righteousness, treating people fairly, taking care of the poor, being honest. I mean, you begin to have these ethics that we strive for in our democratic societies, even though we don't remotely live up to them. A lot of that, got passed on to us through Jesus. So I find him to be not a waste of time. Some people say, well, if he's not the Son of God, then forget it. I don't even want to know anything about him. No, I don't feel that way. Plus, I'd have to ask, what do you mean, Son of God? We're all sons of God, maybe, or children of God. Luke 3, he gets down to Adam and he says, and Adam, the Son of God. So if you're from Adam, you're a son of God. If you're a Homo sapien. So anyway, that's probably gives you a good program enough.
Yeah, I think I think we can stop here. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on, and thank you for the long answers and long and detailed answers to my questions. I think listeners will understand pretty well. I know that as you said earlier, this is controversial, but people need to understand, like, to keep an open mind. And unfortunately, there's a lot of other people out there that don't understand that. At the same time, the evidence is fragmentary. It's difficult.
Yeah.
It's difficult to look into and to study. And
unfortunately, a lot of what we know or think we know, it hangs by a thread.
Right.
I mentioned Jesus being a carpenter. One verse, Mark 6, verse 3. And yet anyone on the street, you ask them, what did Jesus do? Oh, he was a carpenter. Even though they don't understand it, doesn't mean a woodworker.
Right.
Probably means a stonemason. But when you think about it, if it's only mentioned one place, Paul never mentions it, and it's only in Mark that Jesus is a tecton or carpenter.
Right.
a tecton works under architect. Tecton is person who's building under the architect, who's the chief tecton. Right. Architect is chief tecton. So he was a tecton, a builder. We don't know what medium he worked with. I think stone. But my point there would be not whether he was or wasn't, is we think we know so much, and yet that's a single verse. Same thing with, like, how old was Jesus when he died? About, like, was he like 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, or 70? Almost everybody goes, I think he was around 30. How do you know that? One verse in Luke says Jesus was about 30 when he was baptized. So a lot of times people say, well, you're pinning everything on one verse. And I'm like, yeah, you need to think a little bit about what you think you know. Because you're probably pinning your whole view of Jesus on about 5 verses.
Right.
You know, so, but we take what we can get. We're thankful. And I still hope that more things will be discovered. It's always possible. So.
Yeah. All right, then.
Okay, good to talk to you.
Yeah,
Jacob.
same here. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for watching this, everybody. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Check the links in the description. And I'll see all of you in the next episode. Thank you.
Okay.
Hello, viewers. Thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during a live stream. Thank you.